Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for joining today's discussion on building corporate resilience to a changing climate. I'm Verena Radulovic, and I'm the Vice President for Business Engagement here at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, or how we call it C2ES. Before we dive into today's lineup, I want to share just a few housekeeping items for the webinar. The format for today's event will be two opening presentations, followed by an expert panel and a moderated discussion. The first panel presentation will be by Laura Ramajo, who will bring us the latest climate science scenarios for a rapidly changing climate and implications for global economies and the companies that make that up. Rick Cudworth of Resilience First will introduce a conceptual model that companies can use to develop approaches that enable them to absorb and adapt to climate change as a threat multiplier across key dimensions of their organizations. We're going to then shift the panel to talk about with three companies who are driving actions across their operations, their supply chains, and communities in which they operate. One quick note, we're going to try and get to your questions. We have a chat function, or we have a Q&A portion of the Zoom platform in the meantime that you can use to submit questions, and we will do our very best to address them during the discussion. We've also enabled closed captioning for this webinar, so to access that feature, just click on the button on the bottom of the screen. And we will be recording today's conversation, which will be made available on C2ES's YouTube page within 24 hours. You can also get to it via our website, c2es.org. And if you have any technical questions during the webinar, please email webinar@c2es.org. So in a few moments, we'll have a chance to hear from our experts, but first, a few words about what we do here at C2ES, and we'll hear also from Rick in a moment about Resilience First and what they do. C2ES's mission is to accelerate the transition to a thriving, just, and resilient net zero economy. And for more than 20 years, we've worked with policymakers, businesses, and other stakeholders to build support for effective and ambitious climate policies and practices. And to do that, core to our work is a conviction that smart, well-designed climate policies and business action together can grow the economy, sustain good jobs, and improve people's lives, and increase the climate resilience of communities, especially those that are marginalized. A critical piece of the climate resilience conversation is the private sector's ability to withstand a changing climate, especially as it undergoes transformational decarbonization efforts and its ability to enable resilience across the broader community. At C2ES, we've been focusing on corporate leadership on climate resilience for several years now. We work with many stakeholders, including about 47 companies, to release the principles for corporate climate resilience leadership that sets a guiding compass for companies to advance their climate resilience approaches. That's part of our Corporate Climate Resilience Pathways initiative. And these principles, which you can check out on our website, were created in consultation with many leading companies that are focused on being science-based and proactive, transparent and accountable, safeguarding and enhancing, inclusive and equitable, and transformative as the underlying undergirding basis for building resilience. So what does that look like in practice? And we've started to see what that may look like, and you'll hear more from the three companies we have with us today. We also released a report last fall that highlighted how businesses are taking action to build climate resilience, and we have these stories online as part of our innovation story library, which we have on our website. And the idea there is to build an ongoing community of practice where companies can demonstrate leadership and encourage resilience that benefit both businesses and society. So our goal today is to focus our attention on the unfolding scenarios that we have in front of us with a changing climate, particularly in a 2 and 3 degree world, which we unfortunately must be reckoning with. But we're also going to introduce a strategic model for organizational resilience that Resilience First has developed, and then hear from companies that are adopting their new strategies to build resilience across their own operations. So we won't cover everything, but over the next hour, we're excited to host a discussion with you and look forward to your thoughts and questions. In addition, and Rick will talk about this in a moment, we are going to be hosting a peer-to-peer conversation series in the coming months to explore facets of these issues in detail, and so stay tuned to hear more about that. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Laura Ramajo, to share with us the latest climate science and help us to understand what the world may look like as the global temperatures continue to rise. Laura is a researcher at the Center of Climate and Resilience Research and also serves as the Resilience Research Lead for the Race to Resilience campaign. Dr. Ramajo was an IPCC lead author in the 6th assessment report of Working Group 2 on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. And thank you, Laura, for joining us today.
Thank you, Irina, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the science of the climate change. So, well, the next slide, please. I want to start my presentation showing this figure that showing that the atmospheric CO2 concentration continue increasing, and in 2024 another maximum CO2 atmospheric concentration was reached, and with values that are above 52% above the pre-industrial level. This is mainly due to the increasing use of gas, oil, natural gas, and coal, and many others. But this increase in atmospheric CO2 concentration, next slide please, has important consequence on the global climate situation. Next slide, please. We all know that the global temperatures in the planet have increased in the last decades, and in 2024 was a record, a new we can see another record, was the warmest year since the industrial era. And this was also an important year because we exceed the 1.5 degrees, this important goal of the Paris Agreement. But if we want to remain optimistic about this, it's important to know that doesn't mean that the Paris Agreement is broken, but we have to be very careful about that. If we continue increase global temperatures at a rate of 0.0 degrees per decade, we are going to exceed this value before 2030. Next slide. But also, I want to highlight that even the 1/3 of the planet is showing now increasing temperatures, global increasing temperatures. Not all the regions are showing the same trend. And the northern mid latitude and the tropical latitude, where the most of the population of the planet is living right now, is showing the highest rates of warming. So this is very important to understand which are the risks in the several system, and the regions. Next slide, please. And just to give you the most updated data, January of this year was 1.75 degrees above the pre-industrial level. And this is very important also because we are now under the influence of La Nina event that usually is related to coldest temperature across the globe. So next slide, please. What is the future? What can we expect? We can expect that even if we continue increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, temperature will be increasing in the future. And the temperature or the degrees that increase this temperature depends of the emission externally. But on that is not only going to change the temperature at global level and the regional level, is also will change the precipitation regimen, but also will change the sea level rise, the sea levels, the ocean acidification, the amount of oxygen in the ocean, will change the ocean currents, will increase the extreme events like wildfire or heat waves, but also collapse, for example, the Arctic and the Antarctic, and many other impacts. Next slide. And also, so what is the best ways to cope with this climate scenario, the present and the future scenario? And a best way, or a one way, good way to do that is, next slide please, is to use anticipatory approach. And this means that we can anticipate to the future impacts. And to do that, we have to cope with these risks, right? So we have to know which are the different climate hazards. That is not only the global temperatures, that's also, as I said before, changes in the precipitation regimen, changes in the ocean properties, and many other variables. But also we have to understand that there are non-climate properties of the system and of the regions, like a vulnerability and exposure, that are also increasing the future impacts and thus the climate-related risks. Next slide, please. So another thing is to understand which are the different paths and the current climate change impacts, because these help us to identify the different risks, the loss, the damage also, but also help us to identify new opportunities and develop different pathways for transformation. And now we know that the impacts of climate change are multidimensional and that only affecting one part of our system, as they are affecting the nature, the social, the economical, the political, and the cultural dimension. Next slide, please. And also it's important to know that it's not the same living in a planet with 1.5 degrees of warming than 2.5 degrees of warming. And here is only a sample that you can see here in the special report of 1.5 of the IPCC. You can see here that the numbers of the day with peak arbovirus transmission days, of the peak malaria transmission day, will increase at global scale, but also at regional scale in a world with only 0.5 degrees of difference. And this is happening for many other systems, for the economical cost of extreme events and many other systems like infrastructure, like energy, and like, for example, food security, water security. The impacts of only 0.5 degrees are very important. Very important. Next slide, please. So when we talk about climate hazard, it's important to understand also that extreme events are increasing in frequency and also in magnitude. And you can see here that even the global mean temperature are increasing in the last decade. The annual hottest temperatures and the annual coldest temperature are increasing even more. And this is so important because this is telling us that the different regions are suffering now increasing number of hot heat waves and also cold waves. Next slide, please. And only to present you here an example. This is the United States, and you can see here how in the last year the number of even with hottest temperatures and the coldest temperatures have increased in number, which is very important because it's causing a lot of permanent causes. Indeed, the next slide, please. You can see here with the number of extreme events that has caused important causes or important economical costs to the United States that are above $1 billion. And only in 2023, the 28 extreme events that was drought, flooding, freeze event, severe storm event caused an economical cost for the United States of more than $5,600 billion, with impact also in the environment, in the cultural heritage, in the health of the people, and many, and also physical and also psychological. Next slide, please. But it's important, as I said before, to recognize that there are non-climate aspects of our system that make them more exposed and more vulnerable to climate change. And here there is a magnificent figure that you can find in the chapter 3 of working group of the IPCC of the last assessment report. And it's important to understand that we don't have the same dependence of the different systems. And here you can see the total dependence of the different regions of the world from the coastal and the oceanic environment. And also you can see here the nutritional and economical dependence. And only seeing this figure, if you can see that all not the regions are the same, present the same dependence of this coastal and oceanic system. Indeed, we can expect in the future, next slide please, that as ocean will be increasing their temperature, we can expect a change in the net primary production. This is the food available for the species that are living in the ocean. So we can expect that alteration in the biomass, in the production and the community structure of marine ecosystem. And we know now the biomass, the production and the community structure of marine system are extremely related with, for example, with the fishery sector that is not only provide high amounts of employees at global level, but also has an important economic value, but also is so important in the food security of the planet. And even in these countries that are only based their protein consuming from the ocean. Next slide, please. Also, systems and regions have intrinsic characteristics that are part of their models, socio-economical models, also the levels of inequities, the types of governance, how they use the ocean and the land ecosystem that provide us like a characteristics or provide us information about how vulnerable they are. We know now that, for example, these countries or regions with lack of resources or lack of information of with unsustainable use of the ocean and the land ecosystem are also and also in increasing levels of inequity will be more vulnerable to the climate change. Next slide. So to cope with to cope with climate change, we have to work in mitigation and adaptation measures. Mitigation to reduce the greenhouse gases emission, and adaptation to reduce climate risks, vulnerability, and also exposure to increase the resilience of the system and in the region, that is the capacity to recover and to respond to different climate events. Next slide. And I want to finish given this important or elevating the role of non-state actor, including investor, businesses, city, region, and civil society in constructing and increasing the resilience of people and nature, and also the Race to Resilient campaign, this platform that is bringing together non-state actors aiming of making 4 billion people more resilient. If you want to know more about the campaign, you can visit the Race to Resilient Data Explorer and also our last progress report that was presented in the last COP29. This is all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate that perspective, particularly on the critical view of the state of the current state of things and the potential futures that we really need to take seriously, given that so many of these scenarios have complex implications for ecosystems and societies and how businesses operate in those. So as we look at this challenge from the business perspective today, I'd like to turn now to Rick Cudworth, who is the board and executive director, board chair and executive director of the UK-based organization Resilience First. Rick has been at the forefront of developing models and thinking through organizational risk management and resilience strategy for over 20 years. And Rick, we're keen to hear about from you about a new way to think about organizational resilience and how companies can craft their approaches to building resilience to the physical impacts of climate change. And before Rick starts, I'll also add that C2ES is delighted to partner with Resilience First this year on a dialogue series that Rick will also introduce.
Bruna, thank you. Thank you very much. And hi, everybody. Just a little bit more first about Resilience First. As Bruna says, we're a UK-based organisation. We're a not-for-profit organisation with a 500 membership network of predominantly large corporates covering all sectors as well. And the reason for having an organisation like Resilience First is that we focus on helping our members, organizations more generally, strengthen their resilience, but do that in a way that sort of takes account of a whole of system and whole of society approach. So looking wider than just the organization, but its contribution to a whole system and the wider society. And as Resilience First, for our members, we enable knowledge sharing, we provide collaboration opportunities, we provide content through our partners and events as well. So that's really about Resilience First. I'll get into the model, perhaps as next slide here. A little bit of background to the model. So Resilience First, I've been heavily involved in our organization alongside with Cranfield University School of Management. Took some steps middle of last year to look at, how do we best describe the resilience of an organization? How can we best provide a model to help organizations look at their resilience as they move forwards? And a bit of background about this model is, yes, we've developed it with Cranfield School of Management, but it's been based on initially a piece of research which I was involved in with Cranfield back in about 2022. Which resulted in a report called Resilience Reimagined. But that review looked at about 50 organizations at that point, and it set out to examine what types of practices were organizations now taking to improve and strengthen their resilience. And it also looked at what are the sort of steps that regulators in various sectors have been taking to also improve resilience. So, for example, it looked at what the financial sector has been doing to improve financial resilience initially after the financial crisis, and more recently operational resilience as that sector moves forwards. And based on that, it led to a revised British standard 65,000, so BS 65,000 code of practice on organizational resilience. And that codified quite a bit of what was in that sort of Resilience Reimagined paper. This model is then taking it a step further. So we looked at all of those inputs and said, okay, based on what we're seeing, what we're hearing, this is a sort of model that describes how best to look at organizational resilience. And I'm going to step through it fairly quickly because it's really just for a bit of background and context today. But the way to look at it is think about the inside, the colored area as being the organization. So that's about the resilience of the organization, that colored area. And the gray zone, the outer gray zone, is really the context, the world in which that organization lives. And you can see on the outside, we've got themes like demographic shifts, climate change, geostrategic shifts, technology acceleration. That is part of the context within which organizations are operating today. If I come to the colored zone first, the centerpiece here is the model is built around 5 dimensions, and that's based on a 5 capitals model for an organization. So you'll see when we think about organizational resilience, we're talking about, think about finance and financial resilience, think about infrastructure, and that includes technology, supply chain, operations, etc. But think about that in terms of, say, operational resilience. Think about workforce resilience, collective personal resilience within workforce. Environmental resilience and the use and dependencies on natural resources, and then finally social resilience. So the organization, the strength of the organization's relationships and connections with everything from investors through to communities. So a broad view of all its stakeholders. So fundamental to this model is this 5 dimensions, five areas of looking at organizational resilience. And for an organization to truly be resilient, it needs a level of resilience in each of those dimensions. Next slide, please. So based on those 5 dimensions, the next zone on this is to say, we can't make everything resilient. So for each dimension, let's look at what is most important to that organization in the context in which it's operating from a resilience perspective. So what are the handful of things, or, you know, it's not meant to be a sort of a list of 1,000 things, but what are the things that really are important from a resilience perspective within that dimension? So, for example, if you think about financial regulators, when they look at the financial system and major institutions there, they would say in the finance, capital adequacy and liquidity ratio are 2 essential things which provide a level of resilience. So that's the sort of context we're talking about here. Next slide. Yeah, the resilience indicators is the next layer. So built on the dimension, the essential outcomes, then come the indicators. So what is it, or how can we measure that particular outcome? So this is about setting a measurement or a target or a range in which you want to operate or need to stay within. And that is used to effectively enable the measurement of resilience. And I think a key part of this model, if we think about what's different about this model, perhaps to many other models around organizational resilience, is this model is about helping to set thresholds, set targets, and to be able to measure whether our resilience is sufficient. Many previous models are much more about capability, maturity type models. So how mature are we in delivering this capability? Both types of model are valid, I think, and both can work with each other. But this model, in essence, is a measurement model. Next slide, please. So having sort of set out our organizational resilience and our targets and our indicators for this, the way we measure is through stress testing and through obviously real events, which continually test our resilience. So if you think about that external context drive real events. So climate change drives severe storms or flooding or whatever. That tests our resilience. But similarly, in theory, you can test your resilience by using stress testing. So based on that outer model, you can formulate stress tests and say, okay, in this condition, how does my resilience stand up across each of those dimensions? So that's the context of our model. Just to bring it into a little bit of a sort of worked example, if we go to the next slide, please. So if I took the example of a hospital and took the dimension infrastructure, I could say that one of the essential outcomes for a hospital is the availability of critical care beds. So we need to be able to provide critical care. It's essential that we have sufficient critical care beds in order to do that. So we may define that as an essential outcome for a hospital. Next slide, please. And then we can set some resilience indicators. We could say that in normal working conditions, we want to run our critical care beds at a capacity of no more than 70%. So we don't want to exceed 70% capacity. That leaves us a 30% buffer for significant events. And if we have a very significant event, we don't want to exceed a capacity, say, of 98%, because if we do that, then we're in danger of collapsing the hospital system. So those could be two sort of indicators or measures we want to set as targets or thresholds. And then next slide, please. We can then use stress tests using, say, a major incident scenario, a sort of winter flu season scenario, or a pandemic scenario to see what does that do to the availability of critical care beds. If we run that through some modeling and some analysis, are we able to stay within our indicators, and if so, for how long? When do we break? So the model really is about that type of approach to building and testing your organizational resilience. So that's just a very quick run through of the model that I wanted to provide. And the context for doing this, if we just go to the next slide, is as we examine climate change, which is one of those contexts around the outside of the model, we've got a series following this public webinar of a private corporate dialogue series. And that corporate dialogue series will look at each of those dimensions in the model that I've just shown in turn. So one dialogue series will look at environmental strategies, for example, to strengthen organizational resilience. Another one will look at the infrastructure and operational strategies to strengthen organizational resilience. So we're going to go around the model and look at what is really important in terms of resilience to climate change within each of those dimensions. What are organizations doing about that today to help mitigate this, and what more may they do in the future? So those are sorts of questions we have. So today is very much about launching part of that dialogue series. The dialogue series is open to Resilience First members and to C2ES Business Environmental Leadership Council members and other companies in the C2ES community of practice. For Resilience First members, we'll be sending out an invite email tomorrow, so you should receive those. And for C2ES, if you're interested in being part of this dialogue, then please just get in touch with the C2ES team with your contacts there. So thank you very much, and I'm going to pass over to Verena. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick. And with that, I'm actually going to do another handoff to my colleague, Amy Bailey, who is a Director of Resilience and Sustainability, who's going to lead us in a conversation with our three corporate guests.
Thanks, Verena, and thank you, Laura and Rick, for really a look at the reality that we're finding ourselves in and a comprehensive approach to considering and building resilience within an organization. Hello, everybody. I'm Amy Bailey. I'm the Director for Climate Resilience and Sustainability at C2ES. It's my pleasure to lead this panel conversation, and today we have three really fantastic panelists. We have Billy Barden, the Global Climate Transition Director at Dow, Ben Kuchta, the Group Director of Resilience and Crisis Management at National Grid, Cedric Perez, the Group Operational Resilience and Climate Expert at AXA. So I'd love to kind of go around the group here. I'd love for each of you to take about 5 minutes to introduce your company, how it's already seeing climate changes are impacting your business, and really what your company is starting to do about this challenge. As a reminder to our attendees, you can submit your questions into the Q&A portion of the Zoom platform. I'm guessing we'll have a few minutes to catch a couple of them and tee it up to our speakers today. And please just let us know what you're thinking. And so I'd love to start with you, Billy. Thanks so much for being with us today. And maybe you could give us a sense of how Dow is looking at this issue.
Yeah, sure. Amy, thanks very much, and really appreciate the opportunity for the organizers to have a chance to represent Dow's position and vision and how we're taking a look at resiliency and climate change overall. So thanks for the opportunity. For those that don't know, Dow is a large materials manufacturing company. We're global. We have around 90 manufacturing sites in 30 countries. So we see the different aspects of physical and transition risk in the different geographies and the different regions quite heavily within our operations and our business plans. We work in the material space. We make materials that you might use in your homes every day, such as the polyurethanes in your mattress or in your appliance insulation, or the packaging that goes from your vegetable pouches in the microwave to freezer to microwave, or adhesives that end up in your smart devices, or foams that are in your athletic shoes. And we play in basically the plastics, the industrial intermediates areas, the coating, the silicones areas. And our end products end up in market segments such as packaging, especially plastics, industrial infrastructure, consumer solutions like your home care products, personal care products, and then in the mobility space into vehicles and EVs, for example. So we are a large company. We think a lot about risk. In terms of how we address risk, we have a very robust enterprise risk management system, of which our climate risk falls into that assessments. And we take those risks and they help us build our business strategy. So we review both physical risk, transition risk, emerging policy risk, for example, on a recurring basis. And then we build systems in place, much as you were hearing Rick talk about his resilience model. I think it's actually a very good model. We build systems in place that allow us to anticipate that risk, to put responses in place to that risk proactively, and then to pressure test those risks with desktop scenarios or lessons learned from real events, or as the case may be, incorporating lessons from our peers. I think for us, as I said, the risk management helps to set the stage both from a threat perspective as well as an opportunity perspective in our business strategy. We currently, our strategy is to decarbonize and grow. So we're working to decarbonize our asset base as well as to serve the needs and growth and demands of our customers. And we see the pressures from mitigating climate change and mitigating risk, not only from our customers, but our suppliers, our key stakeholders, our shareholders and investors. We see this from government agencies and policymakers. So there are many facets that impact how we address risk, how we're responding to risk, depending on where those partners are in our value chain, our ecosystem. I think if you look at what we're trying to do through our decarbonize and growth strategy, we're deploying new technologies that allow us to decarbonize our assets at the same time while providing new innovative products to our customers. We're working to deploy solutions such as renewable power, for example, where we have currently over a gigawatt of renewable power under contract that we can use in our asset base. We're working on water resilience strategies. One of our greatest resource draws, for example, is fresh water. The materials industry, the chemicals manufacturing facilities can't function without water. And being in rivers or streams that have water quality problems or have brine incursion, for example, that's a problem for us and for those in our industry and many of our neighbors. And so we deploy new technologies to mitigate our freshwater use. We develop products that we can sell into the market that allow us to mitigate others' freshwater intake. And then we're deploying new technologies to help with low emissions, to help our value chain partners decarbonize their scope 3 emissions, for example. So it's a holistic approach. We try to take advantage of the transition in terms of a business opportunity, but we also try to articulate and pressure test our responses to the risk in a way that allows us to be highly resilient.
Thanks for that, Billy. I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about how you're kind of mitigating your own exposure through reducing the needs you have on the natural resources, but also offering up new solutions to put into the marketplace to help reduce or help improve the resilience really of everybody else that is in that kind of broader ecosystem of partners. So can't wait to hear more. I'd love to switch over to Ben Kuchta from National Grid. Would love to get to you next. The energy sector, of course, is uniquely at risk to climate impacts and also really key to ensuring that the surrounding communities and the organizations that rely on a steady stream of energy are also resilient. So I'd love to give you the floor now to share, what's going on at National Grid on this issue.
Sure, and good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. So we currently serve over 20 million customers across both the UK and North America. Our UK business at its core is predominantly regulated electricity transmission and distribution. And in North America, similar to the UK, it is a mostly regulated transmission and distribution and retail of both gas and electricity. We also have another business, National Grid Ventures, that manages a portfolio of electricity interconnectors. So you may have seen during times where the system is under a bit of stress that the interconnectors come in to often save the day. So they play a key part in the UK along with the LNG business. We've also got some thermal generation over in the US along with some other regulated transmission. So pretty large business. In terms of how we are already seeing the impacts of climate change over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, it's clear to see, based on the technology improvements and how we can measure the impacts, that there is definitely very specific regional impacts that come through. So when we look at sort of the macro level, we can look at things like high winds, we can look at heat waves at a sort of macro level, but now with the advances in how we can measure, we can actually see the very more specific sort of localized impacts of that on the local communities and on the specific assets. So in terms of what we're doing, just to give you a high level view, in the UK, some of you may be aware that we've recently submitted our a regulatory plan for our electricity transmission business, and in there you'll see how we've sort of carved it up into 8 different regions to address those regionally specific requirements. And in total, those investments, that's going to be in the region of around £29 billion over the next 5 years or so. And in what that sort of looks like, just to sort of break that down a little bit more, is if we say look at flooding, which of course has been an increasing issue over the years. As of the summer gone in 2024, we've protected about 94 sites from flooding. Our aims over the next sort of 5 years is to install defences at more than 130 sites. And it's because we've got that measurement, we've got that forecasting ability using the outputs of the IPCC's RCPs, or their pathways. So we're able to model that, and we're able to put that into a tool that allows us to see those impacts more longer term on the assets, and that allows us to make the right investment calls moving forward. So that just gives you a sense of sort of what we're doing on flood protection. And in New York, we submitted a climate adaptation plan to the PSC, and that's looking at around $264 million worth of investment into climate adaptation over the next 5 years. So I think some of the other things that's probably worth talking about is that we regularly do, similar to Billy, we have quite a robust risk management process in place. We've got the really good tooling in place using a lot of the outputs from the IPCC to help us do that. And we often run these climate vulnerability assessments to understand those impacts. So also very excited to see Rick's model too, and can see a lot of use and application for that as well moving forward. So hopefully that answers the 3 bullets there for you, Amy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I think a few things that just stuck out to me about what you shared are how the ability to measure impacts has been increasing over the past handful of years, and how much that translates into better decision making and awareness that the risks are different in different regions, and gives you a much better kind of platform by which you can make investment decisions, and integrating in the climate science into that as well. So again, excited to hear more from you in just a few minutes. For now, I'd like to turn to Cedric. Cedric Perez at AXA, thanks so much for joining us today. The work you're doing there is critical, and of course, going to be a great example of how companies can think about their operations, even from the financial services side. So I'll turn to you, and then I'll come back and I'll have some questions for the group.
Sure. Thank you very much, Amy, for having me with you today as part of this panel. So I'm working within AXA, as you mentioned, within a group operational resilience teams. Just a few words to introduce AXA very quickly. So AXA is a leading global insurance and asset management company that is based in Paris, headquartered in Paris, in France. AXA is employing approximately 147,000 people, operating from several countries, 52 countries around the world, and serving 94 million of customers across various regions, including Europe mainly, but also North America, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and Africa. AXA main activities are articulated around insurance services, for sure, providing a variety of insurance products from life insurance, property and casualty insurance, health insurance as well. Providing also asset management services, helping clients to manage their investments through various funds and financial products. Providing also retirement solutions and also risk management and advisory. So that's for the global picture. When it comes to climate change, AXA, as several other companies, has already started to feel and to experience the impact of climate change on the organization. For example, last year, we have been exposed and affected by the wildfire impacting Los Angeles in California, that forced to the closure of our offices and evacuation of some of our employees living in the exposed area. Also last year, some of our entities based in Southeast Asia have been exposed to extreme heat. And as a result of that, measures have been implemented to limit the exposure of our employees into these geographies so that they can continue their activity while protecting their health. In parallel to that, from a business perspective, we are also feeling the pain from our customers that are requesting more and more support, facing extreme weather events, such like floods, for example, that took place last year in Valencia, but also in the north of France during 2024. Also, crises are piling on top of one another to the point where questions are now being raised about the insurability of the world from our customers, from governments, but also in the public opinion. So to mitigate these physical risks on our organization, we are obviously developing resilience plans, capabilities, strategies, and response. This is what we are doing at Group Operational Resilience for years now, and we were also developing these capabilities facing natural catastrophes. But looking at the past, looking at previous experience, that's how we were used to develop these plans. But climate change is acting as a game changer, in fact, and is forcing us to not look only at the past, but also anticipate and look at the future in front of us in order to enhance our resilience capabilities. So that is where we developed in AXA a dedicated initiative that I'm working on to climate resilience that is called CRAFT. That is an acronym standing for Climate Resilience and Adaptation to Future Threats, and which aim at establishing our organization as a climate change ready organization. And for that, we are anticipating what could be the physical risks on our organization by leveraging on all the internal expertise that we have within AXA, within our professional families, in order to elevate our resilience to extreme weather events. This initiative aims also at supporting the society, supporting the communities that we are operating with, to help them building their own resilience to climate-related risks. So for that matter, we developed a specific framework, and like it has been highlighted earlier by Laura, it is very important to start with to assess impacts of climate change, to understand our exposure and our vulnerabilities to this type of events. So we are working with science. We are developing our assumption based on scientific data in order to have a better understanding of how these climate-related risks will evolve in the future and to understand our exposure as a company. Then, based on this global understanding, we are developing some specific guidelines for our entities, bringing together knowledge from other professional families, other group functions, such like human resources, risks, security at large, including physical security, and also communication, in order to help our AXA entities across the world to elevate their own resilience to specific climate-related risks. What to do from an HR perspective, what to do from a communication perspective, really to have a common approach in order to elevate their own preparedness, readiness, and response capabilities. Once this framework is implemented locally, we also engage all of our stakeholders in order to elevate their awareness into specific simulation and tabletop exercise dedicated to climate-related risks in order to, again, elevate our resilience capabilities. And in relation with our objective to support communities to elevate their own resilience, we are also publishing, and I believe that Philippe will share the links into the chat. We are also publishing some public guidance for flood, for heat wave, to share with the communities our expertise, our experience with regards to this type of risks, so they can also benefit from that and start developing their own resilience to climate change.
Wow, thanks, Cedric. I think something that's occurring to me from how you just ended there is this idea that, you know, you're developing these capabilities and these resources internally and then sharing them back out with the broader public. And I think that strikes us as really important, and we're kind of hearing that across the speakers. This idea of interdependence is really key, and so appreciate that you mentioned that piece as well. I'm also hearing a lot of extreme weather events like heat waves, flooding. These are things that are already impacting your businesses, and then chronic issues like water quality. So I'm just I want to just flag that for the group here. And what I'd like to do now is kind of pull in from the initial part of our conversation where we are thinking about a 1.5 degree world, and maybe even hotter, 2-3 degrees. And then if we're hearing about a conceptual model to build organizational resilience, even in this context where you've got more extreme weather events, more kind of different regional differences that are kind of popping up in extreme ways. And so I'm curious if you could all put your kind of sector hats on. We've got insurance, we've got manufacturing, we've got energy here. if you're considering your organizational resilience from your sector position, which are the 5 dimensions that Rick mentioned that are kind of already that the folks in your sector are already being able to tackle, and which ones are going to be kind of the next level, like that really need to have more solutions? And so, just as a reminder, those dimensions were things like operations, the environment, finances, social, and workforce.
I guess, Amy, I can take a stab if you like for chemical materials manufacturing. We have a lot of players in our sector, in our industry. I can't speak for all of them. I think you see strengths in addressing some of those resilience factors amongst the many different companies. What I can say is, from a Dow perspective, we take advantage and try to look at all of them holistically. You can't have operational resilience and manufacturing resilience without a strong workforce. You can't have a response to a crisis or a weather event without engagement with your communities. You cannot have a viable business and understand the impacts of those particular acute events without the financial acumen to know how to respond. So all of them have to go hand in hand. Certainly from a manufacturing perspective in our industry, we've had a long focus on process safety and environmental mitigation. And so I think you see generally very strong responses to acute events. Things like crisis management plans that allow industry to respond to electrical outage or to a hurricane or to a flood or to a freeze in the case of hot weather climates where freeze can be impactful on operations. Having a crisis management plan to address those acute response and being able to respond, and have engineering and technology solutions such as redundant supply of power, redundant supply of steam, and infrastructure that can withstand that. Those are long-term wholly integrated into our industry kind of characteristics and traits. So I think we have very much strength there, and engagement with the communities also is a long-term trait for us. Being able to work with the community panels and community advisory panels that we Dow have and others in our industry have to mitigate an event when it happens.
Great. Ben or Cedric, would you like to chime in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely echo what Billy said there. We have a very similar approach in that we take into consideration a number of those different elements of Rick's framework in how we sort of gear up a response or a plan or sort of more strategic sort of investment, if you will. So it's we know that it works because we apply it day to day. It's quite nice actually to see that someone's managed to pull it all together into a simple enough framework that people could adopt into their own business. But it's all critically important. To Billy's point, we've seen recently within storms that we've had in the UK and in the US that if we don't have the sort of strategic spare parts properly sorted out, and we don't have the right workforce side of things sorted out, we don't have the network control side sorted out, it all impacts that time to recovery. So it's all very critical stuff.
And to add to that, Amy, from an insurance perspective, I think that it's really key for us to improve the risk awareness. So as an insurer, we aim to ensure that our policies and practices not only protect individuals and businesses, but also promote risk management and resilience. And for that, we are working closely with large corporate customers to raise their awareness to future climate risks and to support their adaptation efforts, helping clients, for example, to assess their portfolio and to prioritize risk improvement activities, providing recommendations to enhance site protection, providing climate consultancy services and training programs as well. So, and this is part of our craft initiative I was alluding to earlier, and this public guidance that we are making available to the communities in order to enhance their understanding of these climate risks, enhance their understanding of the potential impacts for them to support them elevating their resilience against this type of risks.
Great, thank you. I see we're getting close to time, so this last question is going to be more rapid fire for you, and it's from our audience. If you could share, your favorite or your prevailing climate resilience KPIs, your metric or your target that your organizations are setting, and give us some kind of context about that. That would be very interesting, I think, for us to hear.
Sure, I'll kick off. So because we've fairly recently done this, I've got about 4 or 5, but I can sort of categorize them in the sort of flooding bucket. We've got warm weather, cold weather, and high winds as some of the ones that I'm concerning myself with. Under flooding, if I just look at coastal flooding in particular, the vulnerability here that I've got for that metric is the frequency of occurrence of coastal flooding and future impacts due to sea level rise. Heat waves, for example, number of times per year when both the maximum and minimum daily temperature remains above thresholds for several days. And then, of course, we've got the knock-on impact next to those metrics in terms of, it's a risk of power failure and so on and so forth. So there's a few. I will say, if you do want more information, it's in our annual report as to what some of those metrics are and how we've defined them.
Yeah, and to complement what Ben just said, when it comes to extreme heat as well indicators, so we are developing our plans based on the future and how it could evolve in the future. So we are looking at number of high temperature, number of days where we could face high temperatures, and what these temperatures could be based on heat index as well.
Yeah, I guess, Amy, for us, we have a number of longer term and more recently promulgated climate targets that we have used to address resilience as well as our impact on climate. One of our longest standing goals is tracking of unplanned events and releases or potential releases within our manufacturing sites and communities. When you have an unplanned event, that's an opportunity to mitigate that in the future. For climate, we have recently published a set of goals around water resiliency and water stewardship. For example, we're by 2050 making our top 25 sites water resilient and securing 50,000 acres of habitat, which goes to nature-based solutions. And then in the carbon emission space, we're on track to reduce our carbon emissions by 5 million metric tons from 2020 to 2030. Using new technology like ethylene production with carbon capture sequestration, which we're doing in Fort Saskatchewan. It's the first of its kind net zero project, scope 1 and 2 up there in Canada, and is also deploying small modular reactors, studying that project for potential deployment in Texas. So we have a wide variety of targets and opportunities and technologies and approaches we're using to improve our climate position and our climate resiliency.
Very helpful. Thank you. And we're coming at time, so I want to relay my appreciation to the panel for sharing your insights and giving us kind of a peek behind the doors at your organizations. And of course, we're eager to hear more and hope that you can participate in the dialogue series that we'll be kicking off a little later this month. For folks on the call, just as a reminder, that's an invitation to companies in the Business Environmental Leadership Council, Resilience First's membership organizations, and a number of other companies that we have been engaging through our initiative and beyond. So if this looks like it relates to your work, we would love to hear from you and see if we can get you into the mix. I will send some more information to our members soon. I would like to just say one last thanks for everyone. Wonderful information today, really helpful to kind of remind ourselves what the future is looking like, what the current status is, and give ourselves some additional tools and conceptual models to really think through how do we tackle this together. As a reminder, we are going to post the recording of today's conversation on C2ES's YouTube page, and we'll also send it out to everyone after the webinar concludes over email. And so please stay tuned for that. And we look forward to continuing to engage the folks on this call and our speakers and others that we have yet to meet. So Hope everyone has a great day, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.